Yellow.
Or amber, as they call it in the UK. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started while we all watch Mary's screen with interest to see what she is coming up with.
That's yellow.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Tyrion would love it too. Let's have our official host get us started with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr.
I would be
Sergeant
happy
at
to do
Arms.
so, Madam President. If everyone will please mute themselves, focus on my screen, and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Back to you, Madam President, and now host.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Sergeant at Arms. I have hope, not fear, that this is going to be an excellent meeting. And this time I made sure to double check who is the Toastmaster, so I don't do like I did last week and introduce somebody who is not in that role. So I'm fairly sure that today Steve is supposed to be the Toastmaster. Did I get it right, Steve?
Says the what? What?
Toastmaster?
Yes.
Yay! Okay, take it away,
I
Mr.
resemble
Toastmaster.
that remark. Thank you so much. Happy to have everyone join our meeting this week. I think the theme was alluded to there a little bit, fear and hope. That should be a fun table topics, I think, or an interesting one is maybe the better word. We have one little change tonight. Mary will be taking Selena's place as timer. Everyone else's roles were as appointed. Got a couple of speakers tonight and should be a great evening. I will now turn the meeting over to, oh, one other thing. We do have a joke of the evening, and maybe Pat would like to share it with us right about now.
Actually, I have a series of mini jokes about teachers and students. So here's joke number one. The teacher says to the child, "How old is your father?" The child says, "He's 6 years old." The teacher says, "What? How is this possible?" The child says, "Well, he became a father only when I was born." And then the teacher turns to Maria and says, "Maria, go to the map and find North America." Maria says, "Here it is." And teacher says, "Correct. Now, class, who discovered America?" And the class says, "Maria."
Maria.
Hey, this one, teacher says, "Donald, what is the chemical formula for water?" Donald says, HIJKLMNO. Teacher says, "What are you talking about?" Teacher said, "Well, yesterday you said it was H2O. And the final one, and I especially, and those of you who have had the same career that I have had are going to love this one. Teacher says, "Harold, what do you call a person who keeps on talking when other people are no longer interested?" And Harold says, "A teacher." And
Very good.
That was great. Good humor. Thank you. And now, why don't you just continue on as our general evaluator and give us a little insight as to your role.
right.
Yeah.
Well, as you're aware, my role as general evaluator is to look at all aspects of our program this evening and to give feedback about it, identify what we're doing well, of which I'm sure there is a great deal, and maybe identifying some little glitches that might have happened along the way. But this is not a solo activity. I have a wonderful evaluation team consisting of Christina, who is going to evaluate Dean's speech, Kathleen, who's going to evaluate Lloyd's speech, the timer, who is now Mary, the grammarian, who will introduce the word of the day, and that is Jackie, And then the odd counter, who will be Rob. So that is the team. I'll turn it back to Steve.
Muted. You're
Oops,
muted.
sorry, thank you, Pat. I wonder if maybe we could ask for an explanation of each of the sub-evaluators' roles this evening.
Oh, all right. The people who are evaluating the speeches, Christina and Kathleen, will identify for the entire group the objectives of each speaker and will evaluate their presentation skills and any other strengths that they may have, and will also give feedback to the individual to help them to develop their future skills and their future competence. The timer will keep track of the timing for each speech. And Mary, do you want to tell us the timing and what the cues are you're going to use to let people know if they've gone over time or not? You're muted, honey.
Yes, I need to hear from the two speech evaluators so that I know how long the speeches will be, though. So I need to hear from Christina and Kathleen.
Christina, would you like to go first?
Christina?
Yes, tonight I'll be evaluating Dean's speech. Is the icebreaker in the presentation mastery pathway. His speech will be 4 to 6 minutes. Dean would especially like us to pay attention to his eye contact. And he would like to hear back from us what the speech causes each of us to do, think, or feel. I'll report my observations of Dean's speech when called upon. Thank you.
Kathleen?
I have the great honor of evaluating Lloyd's speech. Lloyd is on the effective coaching pathway. He's doing a level 2 project, Understanding Your Leadership Styles. It's a 5 to 7 minute speech. He has learned quite a bit about leadership in that level. What he'll be doing is identifying his primary leadership style and giving us some tips about leadership styles and leadership in general. Looking forward to it, Lloyd.
Very good. So I will be timing Dean's speech 4 to 6 minutes. At the 4-minute mark, I will show the green. I have a big green purse here. The green light, 5 minutes. This is as good as I can do for yellow. It's black and tan. Yellow. At 6 minutes, my red purse comes up. Okay. These are Swedish purses, by the way. Lloyd has a 5 to 7 minute speech. 5 minutes, I'll show the green for Lloyd. 6 minutes, the yellow, and 7 minutes, the red. Table topics are from 2 to 3 minutes. I don't know about this. Here's the 2 minute, 2.5 minutes, and 3 minutes. I feel like a juggler. Speech evaluation, I got that wrong, didn't I? Yeah. There are no guests here, so we can just keep this between ourselves, but speech evaluators are 2 to 3 minutes. 2, 2.5, and 3. And you all know table topics is at 1 to 2 minutes. I won't go through the drill again. Back to you, Madam General Evaluator.
Okay. Our grammarian will introduce the word of the day. Jackie?
Yes, I will. And I will be looking forward to fun turns of phrase and visual language, or just fun language. The word of the day is, and I'm going to try to share my screen, it's quixotic. This is a very fun word, I think, myself. And I am going to show you. So as you can tell with this little dude down here, that is supposed to be Don Quixote. And I did not know this, but quixotic comes from his last name, and quixotic means extravagantly chivalrous or romantic, exceedingly unrealistic and impractical, and also foolishly impractical, especially in the pursuit of ideals. So quixotic, I think of this word as very idealistic. You could use it this way. The father did not want his son to go into a music career because he said, that is just a quixotic pie in the sky idea. Quixotic. Madam General Evaluator.
All right, and finally, but last but not least, Rob, can you tell us what the counter does?
I would be happy to, Madam General Evaluator. I always enjoy this role because I get to quote a very famous Toastmaster, and I self-quote. When giving a speech, it is better to pause in silence than to punctuate the silence with needless words and sounds. Unself-quote. My role tonight is to look through that verbal shrubbery to find those words that punctuate our language. Words like the top hits of words and so, which are used quite frequently at the beginning of sentences. I will be looking for those in particular. And any other filler words and sounds, and I will report at the end of the meeting as to how well we have done. Thank you, Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you very much. And now that we know what all those roles are, I'm turning it back to our Toastmaster, Steve Schwinn.
Thank you, Pat. Great thing about Toastmasters is that it gives us the opportunity to grab our joust and head for the opposition, having polished our skills and not appearing quixotic in our approach to speaking. That's interesting too, quixotic, as opposed to chaotic, Don Quixote. Yeah, interesting. Tonight, our first speaker has been an intermittent member of Toastmasters since 1979. He tells anyone with the slightest interest that Toastmasters was the single best investment he made in his personal and professional life. He has numerous life-changing stories that he likes to share with prospective members, and we'll share some of those tonight. Please welcome Dean Carath with his speech entitled Toastmaster Dividends. Dean?
Good evening, fellow Toastmasters. Indeed, Toastmasters is the best investment I ever made in my professional and personal life. It was not at all a quixotic adventure these last 40 years. Toastmasters has paid me a dividend almost every day since then. And I want to share some of those dividend stories with you tonight. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a degree in chemical engineering. At that point, I was a rather inarticulate and shy person. I took my first job in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at a battery factory. One of the things I quickly discovered was that they had a corporate Toastmasters club, which I immediately joined and participated in for a year and a half, at which point I found myself married and we'd moved to Richland, Washington to work at the Hanford site. Once there, I quickly found a new club, Atomic City Toastmasters, and continued my adventure. Now, one of the things about my new job was I worked in a research and development group. And one of our responsibilities was to go to technical conferences. Eventually, I had to give my own presentation. Not a problem. I've been in Toastmasters. So on a Sunday afternoon, I flew down to Reno, Nevada. After I got checked in, I did the same thing that every good Toastmaster should do. I went down to check out the speaking venue. Well, I followed my little paper map. Yeah, we used those things back in the day. And I walked into this cavernous auditorium. Now that looked like the size of the Seattle Seahawks football stadium to my young eyes. Now, the thing that you need to understand is that until then, all the conferences I'd been to had nice little parallel sessions with maybe 20 attendees in each session, pretty much like a nice, comfortable Toastmasters club meeting. So thinking that maybe I was in the wrong place, no hoping that I was in the wrong place, I walked down to the front of the stage, yes, a 4-foot high stage, and asked the guy who was setting up equipment there, "Is this where the presentations are?" He said, "Yes." "Well, how many people do you expect to be here?" "Oh, 500 or 600. I grabbed onto the stage to steady myself and I thought, okay, 20 people, 500, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. You've given speeches, you can do this. And I did. But let me tell you, I was very, very grateful for that Toastmasters dividend of confidence. At some point in the 1980s, I found myself divorced. As I picked through the trash in the dark alley that my life had become, I found an old crumpled note. And it said, "You know, Dean, you might not have listened to your ex-wife very well." But yeah, I think you're right. So the first opportunity I had, I took the best Toastmasters module I've taken. At least it was the most helpful to me. And that was the effective listening module. In that module, I learned that listening is a skill that can be learned. I learned how to listen with my heart and my head, as well as my ears. Now, listening is still a challenge for me. I have to stop, make a conscious effort to stop my brain from rushing ahead and thinking about what I'm going to say when the person speaking is finally done speaking. But I must have learned something because I've been in the same committed relationship for nearly 37 years with my wife. Now, that's not the only reason we're still together, but I think it's a considerable one. Once again, considerable dividends from Toastmasters. At some point, I'd gone to school, night school, to get a master's degree in chemical engineering. And I must have impressed one of my professors, who was also a manager at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. A few months after I graduated, he called me up and said, "Hey, Dean, if you're ever thinking about leaving the area, I'd like to see your resume." I said, "Well, Harry, as a matter of fact, I am." Within 2 weeks, I had an interview. Within a few months, I had a new job at the National Laboratory in Richland. And I spent 25 wonderful years there, working with amazing people, doing wonderful things in an incredible organization. One of the things that my new boss at that job said a few weeks after I started was, "Geez, Dean, we were sure all impressed with how articulate you were during your interview." Ah, yeah, Toastmasters table topic skills put to work. Once again, an invaluable dividend. Well, those are just 3 of the stories that I have about how Toastmasters has helped me and provided many dividends to make my life so much richer. I wish I had time to talk about how it's helped me in leadership, mentoring, and service to an organization, but maybe some other time. I'm sure you all have your own stories that you have. I encourage you to use them, develop them, tell them to people, get them involved in Toastmasters, and get them here to our club. Mr. Tabletop or Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Dean. Well done. Enjoyed that. Could we have a minute on the time clock for comments that you all would like to share with Dean about your interpretation or experience with his speech? How are we looking here? Close to a minute? That's a minute. Thank you, Mary.
Oops, I pulled a Steve, didn't I? Sorry.
Do we have someone in the club named Steve? There's a mountain of books, seminars, workshops, programs devoted to developing leadership skills. Obviously, Toastmasters International is in the thick of the leadership development crowd with its slogan, "Where Leaders Are Made." Several programs and pathways projects encourage that. However, the reality is that leadership is a lot like the weather. Everyone talks about it, but no one manages to actually do much about it. Lloyd Smith thinks that most likely because leadership is actually highly individualized, Lloyd Smith thinks that because leadership is actually very highly individualized. How best to lead depends a great extent on how well the skills and personality of the leader meshes with the needs and personalities of the group being led. For that reason, Lloyd will use the Pathways Project, Understanding Your Leadership Style, which he is doing for level 2 of his effective coaching path, as an entry point into a description of a leadership task he undertook and how dependent the outcomes were on the individuals involved and the situation the group was in. Please join us in hearing Lloyd Smith, Herding Cats.
Thank you, Steve. Leadership really is a tricky subject if you think about it. And doesn't it ever make you wonder, with all of the thousands and thousands of books and workshops and seminars and everything else about dealing with leadership, it's still a problem. It should have been solved long ago if those things were very effective. They're clearly not. And I really do think it's a highly individualized thing. This project, Understanding Your Leadership Style, which is a level 2, I think, in most of the paths, is a really interesting one. It's based on a questionnaire, a 48-item questionnaire that asks for what you do in various situations. And then there's a scoring guide where you basically array these answers into 8 categories and add up the points and decide what your leadership style is. I'm always a little suspicious of questionnaires like that because it's pretty easy to game them. But I decided to take this one seriously, and it was an interesting thing. I ended up with a 3-way tie in terms of what my leadership style was. I'm an authoritative leader, which they define primarily as meaning provides long-term direction and focus on end goals. I'm also an innovative leader, which they define as meaning primarily sharing a vision of the future and encouraging the group to achieve it. And I'm a democratic leader, meaning which they say primarily means relying on consensus and consensus decision making. Now, the problem is those three things are not compatible. In fact, two of them are directly contradictory, but I scored a tie on all of them. And you might think that's a bad thing, but I thought, yeah, because that's kind of the way things have worked out for me most of my life. I'd like to describe one specific situation that might illustrate this. First of all, you need to know two little known facts about public education. One is that it's extremely faddish. Every year there's a new thing, this year's new thing, which replaces last year's new thing, and which in turn will be replaced by next year's new thing. The result is there's constant turmoil going on and resentment of the process and everything else that you can imagine. Most veteran teachers just ignore everything because they know it's not going to last anyway, so they don't have to worry about it. The other thing about public education is that teachers are highly independent. Once you close your classroom door, as long as there's not screaming or blood or smoke, you're probably going to get left alone. The reason for that is that school principals are impossibly busy. There's no way they can observe all of their employees, their staff at all times, because they're busy doing other functions, business, discipline, public relations, everything you can think of. The result of that is that a lot of teachers view themselves as little independent kings and queens of very tiny kingdoms. And it's very, very difficult to get them to take instruction or follow directions. Now, that's where the title of my speech comes from, Herding Cats. Eugene McCarthy, who ran for president as a Democrat in 1968, was once asked, how can you lead the Democrats? They're everywhere ideologically. And he said, well, it's like herding cats. If you go into a room and try to make the cats all go to a door, they won't do it. They'll just swarm all over the place. But if you go in the room and kind of wander around and open the door and look through it, pretty soon all the cats will go through in order to find out what you're looking at. And it always struck me that that's the way to do leadership at a school. And so one of these fads one year played into this. Back in the early 90s, there was a fad for something called site-based decision-making. This was based on the theory that all of the important decisions in a school should be made by the classroom teachers, not by the administrators at either the building or district level. Now, in a sense, this is a little bit like expecting the monkeys to run the zoo, and it did turn out that way in a lot of places. At Eastmont High School, where I was, there were two critical situations that a lot of us were worried about. One of them was that we had a mounting group of F grades, numerous kids getting Fs, and lots of those kids were varsity athletes. And that's because the state at that time said that a kid could be eligible for sports if he had a 1.6 GPA in the previous semester. The end result of that is that a kid could have been completely eligible, say for football, and at the end of 3 years, he would have had half the credits he needed to graduate and a 1.6 GPA. That's absurd, but that's what the state allowed, and so that's what the school decided to do. The other thing we worried about was the increasing amount of class time interruptions for meetings and assemblies and everything else you could think of. We were constantly told we needed to stay on task in our classrooms, and then the kids were allowed out of our classrooms in order to do other things. Well, we had a site council. I offered the other 7 teachers in the English department that I would be their representative on that if they wanted. And they said, great, that means we don't have to do it. So I became a member of the faculty site council. And on the site council, I said, hey, I'll be the chairman if you want. And they said, great, that means we don't have to do it. And that allowed me to have the dream situation of owning my very own democracy. It's a wonderful thing, and everybody ought to have one, I think. What I did was that I combined the authoritative and the democratic leadership styles. I knew the goals I wanted to achieve. I wanted no pass, no play. Every kid should pass every class before he's allowed to be in activities. And so rather than saying that's what I wanted, I just kind of cajoled and jollied people into slowly moving toward that door with the rest of the cats. I also tried open democratic leadership, I relied on consensus because that was required by our bylaws. We couldn't vote on anything. We had to have consensus. At the end of the year, we had no pass, no play, and we had a system where we had academic dead zones where student activities weren't allowed. I was hailed as a hero. I was re-elected chairman for the following year, although I couldn't take the spot because I ended up going to the district office for another assignment. The point of all of this is that you can analyze your leadership style all you want, but for each individual situation, you've got to figure out what works, because having a nifty little chart that shows what your leadership style is isn't going to get anything at all done. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Lloyd. Good speech. Could we have a minute on the clock for thoughts regarding Lloyd's speech?
One minute, Mr. Toastmaster.
Oh, very prompt. Thank you, Mary. Has everybody got their thoughts all well wrapped up? Because we are ready to move on down the path in our table topics procession. And because of the skills of this club's members, I really doubt that we'll head down a quixotic path as we follow Don or Eric on the topic of fear and hope. Eric, would you please lead us down table topics?
Thank you, Randy. Steve just mentioned it. Word of the day is quixotic, so try and work that in. I'm aided in my role tonight by Dean's advertisement for one of the reasons for Toastmasters. Table topics is a great way for us to practice our extemporaneous speaking, which is probably more what we run into day to day than giving speeches. You guys are all veterans. Everybody has a role, so it's been chaotic trying to find out who's gonna have a question, but here we go. Open fear. I was on the exercise bike and my wife was on the cross trainer. I had asked her earlier if she had a question to give me to give one to me, and I didn't realize that when she's on a trainer and she has this oxygen deficit, she came up with one, but I'm compelled to use it. If fear is spelled backwards, it's reef in her mind. So first question. If you could snorkel at any reef in any waters, where would you go and what would you want to see? Jackie.
I was expecting you to ask that of your lovely wife, Christina, because she probably scuba dives. I actually don't scuba dive. I have never been scuba diving in my life. This is probably because I tend to view bodies of water that have flora and fauna and animals in them as ginormous toilet bowls. It could also be because I saw Jaws when I was a teenager. But for whatever reason, I would rather be on the water than in the water. However, I have recommended to people who do like doing diving that in Iceland, there is a place where you can dive and it's between the two tectonic plates. And I think if I was a scuba diver, that is one place that would be fascinating to dive. I will say that I had an amazing experience in the Caribbean going kayaking in the fall of 2019. And it was the most calm and beautiful experience just to be there looking at the gorgeous sights on either side of that body of water and propelling myself in the kayak. It isn't exactly what you asked, but there you go, Mr. Table Topics Master.
Excellent job. I see I'm gonna have to work on having more difficult questions for you.
Yeah, you said that was going to be hard.
Are you a pessimist or an optimist? Do you have more fear or hope in your view of life, and why? Are you a pessimist or an optimist? Do you have more fear or hope in your life, in your view of life, and why? Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Table Topics Master. I've said this before. I've always considered myself the kind of person that considers the glass half full rather than half empty. Life, in my opinion, is too short to be fearful, and that you should have hope in your life. Otherwise, you're not going to have quality of life. I don't fear things that I can't control. If I have any fear at all, it's about things that I can control. And those particular items or circumstances or experiences, I try and look at ways to overcome that fear. Because to consider otherwise and let fear overwhelm me, it just degrades not only my life, but the lives of my family and friends, and most importantly, my wife. I consider myself a pretty positive person. I don't think I've ever said a negative word to anyone on this particular Zoom call, and I never will. However, as the odd counter, I will have to share a bit of bad news, which I'd rather not do, yet if I didn't, we wouldn't get better at our speeches. Thank you very much, Mr. Table Topics Master.
Thank you, Rob. We have fake news, alternative reality, polarizations. How do you go about determining what the actual truth is for yourself? Mary. Rob, could you time, please?
How do I determine what the actual truth is for myself? I think about it a lot. I read, and I suppose in a sense, I meditate over things. You could say that I'm a great worrier, but I like to turn things over in my mind and think about it. I like to put myself in the place of the person who is promoting a certain point of view. Why would they be thinking that way? What is it in their life or their circumstances that would make them see this topic so differently from me? I try to weed out the extremes because usually it's just chaff. It's distracting and you could say it's quixotic. It doesn't matter. You just have to get past it and drill down to what the real issues are. When I worked at Confluence Health, we had an exercise to get to the root cause of something. We asked why 5 times. You know, why do I feel this way? Well, because it makes me fearful. Why does it make me fearful? Well, because I might be embarrassed in front of people. Well, why does it matter that you'd be embarrassed? And you go on until you get down to the root cause. And I find that to be a very helpful tool as well in deciding what my opinion is on something that's controversial and where I stand. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Mary. Nice teaching moment. I like that. What is your biggest hope for our country going forward? What is your biggest hope for our country going forward into 2021? Pat?
My biggest hope for our country is that we will no longer be so divided. I really want us to be united, not that we're robots and everybody thinks the same thing, but that we have respect for others who may think differently from the way that we think, that our inherent kindness and caring for others in our society prevails, that violence is no longer the tool for expressing one's beliefs or solving one's perceived problems. We are the United States of America. You all know the statement, united we stand, divided we fall. This time is a little bit frightening because it almost feels like the years that were antecedent to our Civil War. And what a tragedy that was for our nation in so many ways. So in order for us to come together, we need to operate with mutual respect. We need to do something Mary talked about for solving problems. Ask why. Why do I think this? Why do I believe this? Why do these people think this way? Why do they believe that? How can I respect what component of what they believe is understandable to me? My wish is that we are one nation, undivided, with liberty and justice for us all. That's my wish.
Thank you, Pat. What is your biggest fear that you're carrying over from 2020? What is your biggest fear that you're carrying over from the year 2020? Steve?
My biggest fear might have been going into murky waters. Having scuba dived in Belize and going out over the barrier reef into the gray churning waters beyond into the depths, chocolate milk like. Oddly, you would think the Caribbeans and the Belize down near the equator would be a beautiful place to dive. In fact, it's interesting that the waters are clean and clear, reasonably so, but they're churned up and they're a little milky and they offer not quite the experience that so many people refer to and suggest as being the greatest place in the world to dive. For me, Puget Sound is the place that I like to go. Water's cold. People think it's terrible. Ooh, cold water. It's amazing. The sea life in Puget Sound is prolific. A night dive is an amazing experience when sea life comes out times 20. It's an amazing place. The colors and the experiences in Puget Sound are just beautiful. I like to stay safe and close to home more so than I thought. I think that's the safe harbor that I would choose to remain in 2021. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Steve. And we will turn it back over to you, the Toastmaster, Steve.
Thank you so much. Well, rousing meeting, lots of interesting things happening, lots of good thoughts shared. Now we will get a overview of how our meeting was conducted, and we'll ask Pat to come back up.
I'm kind of speechless. Don't we need to hear from our speech evaluators? Christina, could you give us your feedback about Dean's speech?
Thank you, Pat. Pleased to do that. Dean, your speech, Toastmasters dividends. You stuck to your topic very well. Your speech was well organized. It flowed smoothly, held my attention. It seemed that it was holding everyone's attention. It was also inspirational. You asked what it caused me to do, think, or feel. It caused me to think about my own experiences in Toastmasters and to value Toastmasters even more. I did not find your speech to be quixotic in any sense. On the contrary, it was realistic, practical, and applicable. Features that I especially appreciated: you were standing, the lighting was excellent, your volume and articulation were good, the gestures that you used, the airplane landing, the vast auditorium, heart, head, hand, there were many others as well. Excellent word choices and phrasing. I'm sure our grammarian will pick out some of those to share. Your use of the prop, the money, the bill, after each story, bringing it right into the camera, very effective. I appreciated that. With regard to the bill, one thing that you might want to work on is how you introduce that. I personally found it distracting at the beginning that you had something in your hand and I didn't know what it was. You were gesturing with one hand and clutching the bill in your other hand. My eye was on that hand. My mind was on what in the world is in his hand. Maybe leaving it down and then picking it up just as you introduced the first time. Then you could continue to hold it and it wouldn't have been a distraction to me. To challenge yourself, this is a tough one because we want to see people's reactions, but in order to see people's reactions, we have to take our eye off the lens of the camera, which takes our eye contact away from our audience. It almost seems like we need to cover the face of the screen and focus on just the lens of the camera in order for it to appear to the audience that we are making contact with each one of those little boxes on the screen. That's a very tough thing. I don't know how to accomplish it. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Looking forward to hearing more. Dean, you're a great speaker. Thank you for sharing this evening.
Thank you, Christina. And now let's hear from Kathleen about Lloyd's speech.
Thank you. To find my mouse there. It's my pleasure to evaluate Lloyd's speech. Once again, I think he hits a home run. I love hearing him speak. The first thing that I thought was very notable was the introduction. He wrote a very nice detailed introduction. So many of us, when we write a speech and we put so much effort into writing the speech. We get to the point to do the introduction, and we end up with one sentence. It was very thoughtful and set the stage for the whole speech. So congratulations on that. I'd love that you disclosed the personal information, the results of your leadership assessment. Very fortunate for you that you had 3 different styles that you could take us through each one, help us learn about each one as you described them. You went on to connect those styles, 2 of them most prominently, into an example in your teaching. Very easy as a listener to flow through that transition into the story. And you brought it back and described that it was about, there was something of a democracy because there had to be, but it was also authoritarian leadership. I always like your pace, Lloyd, and I would like to emulate it. You have a steady pace. It's very calm. You had a couple of key phrases that I really enjoyed. The monkeys running the zoo.
Mhm.
One should own a democracy. Everyone should do it.
Mhm.
I love that. That's a great idea. The other thing I enjoyed in this speech, and you do it in many of your speeches, Lloyd, is you brought in history. You have this great wealth of academic information that you bring forward and share with us. I really enjoy that. As an aside, my dad was a historian. I always love to hear little tidbits of history because of that. Improvements, not much here. At the beginning, your eye contact was a little down, and I thought, uh-oh, but that was about 60 seconds, and that it came back up and it seemed to work just fine. You might try a little more vocal variety. That's a suggestion. Overall, I thought it was a really remarkable speech. Before I close, I would thank you for one other thing. It's such a good example for the rest of us. Lloyd sent me this afternoon, not just the evaluation sheet. He sent me the entire pathway. I could look and see what really he was trying to accomplish and what he had learned through the pathway. I find that very helpful in doing the evaluation. Thank you for that, Lloyd. And thank you for your speech.
Thank you, Kathleen. Now we get to hear from Mary about the timing. How did we all do?
We did so well. What a group. Nobody would have been disqualified in a contest today. Dean, your time for your speech was 6 minutes, 20 seconds. Lloyd, 7 minutes, 2 seconds. For table topics, Jackie, 1 minute, 48. Rob, 1 minute, 52. I was 1 minute, 38. Pat was 1 minute, 54 seconds. Steve, 1 minute, 43 seconds. Evaluations. Christina was 3 minutes, 11 seconds, and Kathleen, 3 minutes, 14 seconds. And that's my report.
Thank you very much. Now for the grammarian. We'll find out how elegant our speech was by Jackie.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator. Christina used a word to describe Dean's speech, inspirational, and I think that applies to this whole meeting. Specifically, I shouldn't say specifically, I should say especially with Rob and Mary. I felt like in your table topic answers that I wanted a book of wisdom from you both. I like, Rob, how you said a very famous Toastmaster and you self-quoted yourself. You talked about verbal shrubbery and the top hits of ands and so's. Your glass is half full. And you said life is too short to be fearful. I thought that was very profound. And hope in your life. You have to have hope in your life to have quality of life. That was profound as well. And that you look for ways to overcome fear. Mary, I like that you said you like to turn things over in your mind and put yourself in somebody else's shoes when you're evaluating their credibility, which is something that I haven't thought of. And the idea that you're trying to weed out the extremes. You gave us a very good visual of the chaff and the distractions. And I really love the ask why 5 times to get to the root cause. I feel like I'm going to use that, and that definitely needs to be in a book. Dean, your dividend stories were very visual. You had the dividend of confidence, the dark alley that your life had become made us feel so sad. And that table topics prepared you for your interview, your invaluable dividend. I love how you attach those. Pat, inspirational as well. Actually, everybody was inspirational. I shouldn't narrow it down to just Rob and Mary. United, not as robots, but having respect for other people that believe differently. Not inherent kindness and caring prevails, and violence is no longer a tool for expressing our beliefs or solving problems. And I love how you said it felt like these the experience that we're having right now is what happened in the years antecedent to the Civil War. That word antecedent was particularly beautiful, and to have mutual respect for each other. That was all just very, very inspirational, I thought. Eric, talking about Christina as being oxygen deficient and that fear backwards is reef. I really like that. As Kathleen said, Lloyd had so many great visuals. I could see the kids screaming and the blood and the smoke. You gave us a great picture of that. And of course, the herding cats, that picture of how you do that, and the independent kings and queens of their individual kingdoms, as well as the word faddish. That was a great word. Christina, who gave us inspirational, and what Dean made us do and think and feel. Realistic, practical, and applicable. Those are good things for us all to aspire to in our speeches. And I like the visual that you gave us of covering the face of the screen and just focusing on the lens. Steve, you gave us the visual of moving down the path of our Toastmasters or table topics procession. I could see that, questions one after another. Going into the gray, churning, murky, chocolate milk-like waters. That is a visual. Tell us about the prolific sea life and the sea life times 20 at night with the colors and the experiences, and that you want to stay close to home in 2021 as your safe harbor. And Kathleen, you talked about Lloyd's intro as setting the stage for us and flowing through the transition into the story. That was particularly beautiful language and little tidbits of history. I love that. A lot of people use Quixotic. Dean and Mary used it once. Eric and Christina used it once. And Steve used it 3 times. Excellent job. Very great visuals tonight.
Thank you, Jackie. Excellent. Last but not least, Rob Tidd. How about the ahs and ums and all that stuff?
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator. I'm always impressed how well our group does in their speeches or evaluations or whatever role that they're playing. We continue to get better and better. However, there are certain words that still infiltrate our speeches. The top 4 tonight were and to begin a sentence, and so to begin a sentence, Those were the 4 biggies tonight. I will start with me. I had at least one "and" to begin the sentence. I was listening to myself speak. Dean, during your speech, you had a couple of "so's" and a couple of "ands" to begin the sentences. Lloyd, and so happened in a couple of the sentences during your speech. Mary, you were clean other than a y'all. At one point, you said that early on. Christina, you were clean. Eric had one Kathleen, you were clean. Pat was clean on her table topic speech, but early on she had 3 ums. Jackie, you were clean. Steve had 2 uhs. And that is my report. Thank you, Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you very much. I found this evening's speeches to be quite inspirational, to borrow a word from Jackie. But it was so insightful to understand each of these speakers' careers and the elements that influence them, enable them to become the very effective speakers that they are. I have to say, what really resonated with me was when Lloyd talked about herding cats. It got my attention because, having been in higher ed administration, you haven't lived. And I started my career as an elementary teacher, and I've taught 6th grade. And if you talk about herding cats, 6th graders are it. But there's nothing like trying to herd a bunch of PhDs who think that they have PhDs in world and universal knowledge. So that really caught my attention. But those were elegant. The people who have given feedback already have taken many of the words I would have used, much of the language I would have used with Christina's and Kathleen's evaluations. I'd like to commend Kathleen for standing to do her evaluation. Usually we stand when we give our speeches, but she stood to give her evaluation. And I thought that was something, it provided a really nice model for us, maybe for future when we do have that evaluator role, is to see it as a speech as well as a responsibility. Jackie's overall evaluation, or grammarian's report, was quite elegant, not the least bit quixotic. The questions for our table topics were really intriguing and challenging, and the responses were equally intriguing and challenging and thought-provoking. Overall, I think this has been one of the most interesting and engaging evenings of Toastmasters in a while. Several of the more recent ones have been that way, and this one falls into that class. So I would say to everyone, bravo, you did a great job. And now I'll turn it back over to our president.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator. That was beautifully succinct and not quixotic either. We are going to send our votes for Speaker of the Evening to Rob, I believe. Okay, we will send it to Rob. And while we are doing that, our VPE, Lloyd, is there anything you would like to add?
Yes, next Monday is the President's Day federal holiday. Our past practice is not to meet on those Monday holidays. Is that agreeable to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, no meeting then next Monday. So the following Monday would be the 22nd would be our next meeting then.
Thank you. Fabulous. Does anybody else have anything? All right. Let's see if oh, you unmuted. Go for it, Rob.
We have a winner, Madam President. His speech paid dividends. Our winner this evening, Dean Carath. Congratulations, Dean.
Congratulations, Dean. We're looking forward to many more speeches by you. This
Thank you. I'm glad.
first time I've had the pleasure of hearing you, and
Well,
I'm
that's the
excited.
first time I got my lazy butt off the chair to actually write one.
Oh, fantastic. All right, we are a little bit over, so I will send us off with a good night. Thank you for a wonderful meeting, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Hold up a second, Jackie. I gave host rights to you. If you could pass them back, and then I
did
can
pass
go
them
ahead.
back quite a while ago.
Oh,
Do you not have it? Let me double check. I thought I did.
Hi, everybody.
Bye.
I just need to make sure that I stop the recording.
Change host. Okay.
Okay, I got it.
Thought I did, but maybe I missed a button or